All right, what's up, Bulldogs? I am super excited about this video because we're going to be talking about basically the levels of consciousness and what level you're at. So this material, this diagram I'm showing you, it comes from David Hawkins' work. He wrote some really good books, Transcending the Levels of Consciousness, Power versus Force, and Letting Go. There's also a few other ones. I haven't read the other ones, but those are the three that I've read. And there's some stuff that's a little woo-woo in there, but I want to really take a look at this because this is really, I think, very powerful stuff to look at and to see where you are in this. And I think understanding these levels of consciousness, as again, this is a model, right? No models are 100% accurate, but I think this is super, super interesting. And I think you'll find this interesting if you haven't been exposed to this, but I wanted to kind of walk through this with you and show you kind of how this plays out, right? So his kind of theory with this is that there's these different levels of consciousness and they calibrate on the scale from 0 to 1,000. And these are the levels here. And there's some, life view, God view, the emotion and the process, but the key thing to understand is that, like, the difference between power versus force and what is strong versus weak. And these lower levels of consciousness, there's also an image here of this funnel, right? You can look at this. Let's put this in a new tab here so you can see this, and you can see that it's sort of like it's expanded versus contracted consciousness. I think that's a great way to look at this, and it's really awareness, right? We've talked about this before, but how aware are you? How much awareness do you have, right? And so at the bottom of this level of consciousness, of these levels of consciousness, is shame, right? Shame is kind of the lowest level. It's the God view is despising, like you view God as despises you. The life view is that you're miserable, right? It calibrates at 20. The emotion is humiliation, and the process is elimination here. But shame, if you think about it, is such a destructive. It's the worst place to be. It's the lowest level of consciousness. When you're living in shame, you are unable to really see other people. You're unable to really see anything very clearly. It's a place where people do the worst things, where they do the things that lack love the most, because you're operating from this really low place, right? And shame and guilt are different. Shame tends to be guilt to a degree, I would say, is somewhat of a healthy thing to have guilt, but having shame, toxic shame, can really bring you down and can really cause you to do bad things. A lot of times when we have shame, what happens is that when we experience shame or something makes us feel shameful, we get angry at the person who created that feeling within us. Even though we did something wrong, they made us feel bad. Like, shame is really saying that I am a bad person, whereas guilt is saying I did a bad thing, right? But coming up from there is guilt. Guilt also is kind of a lower level of consciousness, right? When you're in this guilt mode. Up from there, we've got apathy, right? These are still low levels, right? Apathy is this kind of hopeless. God is condemning. It's despair. It's abdication. Apathy is where you're when you talk about, I talk about the levels of emotional maturity. It's the numb mode where you're zombie mode, where you're not allowing things to hurt you, but you're not experiencing emotions, right? You're just apathetic. It's a place where you're likely to not even want to be around anymore. But up from there, if you make it out of apathy, then maybe you're in a state of grief. That's where you feel a loss, right? You feel regret. Again, not a positive place to be. It's still in this kind of red zone here, but it's better than apathy. It's better than guilt. It's better than shame. Next is fear. Fear is a little bit higher place, because at least if you're in fear, then you're motivated to do something. Being motivated out of fear is not the best place, but it is some kind of motivation. When we have fear, we have a high level of anxiety, is what we're feeling. Fear and anxiety are essentially the same thing, and we want to withdraw. We want to escape. Then we have up here, which is still not good, is desire, right? Desire is craving, right? We're enslaved by desire. This is where addictions live, right? If you're living in an addicted state, you're just constantly trying to feed this desire. Up from there is actually anger, right? So anger actually ends up being somewhat positive compared to these other levels of consciousness that you're living at. And we can, obviously we have a spectrum of these emotions, but there's sort of this level that we live at, and that's what I'm talking about when we're talking about this level of consciousness. That at anger, it's vengeful, right? We have a lot of hatred. We have aggression. Anger is something that it's not positive, right? Sometimes we try to give positive attributes to anger, but it's not. Up from there, we've got pride. Okay, now we're actually moving into this transition phase between what are these lower levels of consciousness, which are kind of the primal levels that are weak, and the levels of force, to almost to power. But pride is not quite there yet. Pride, at least at this point, it's better than anger. When we're feeling pride, we scorn other people, but we don't hate them. We just feel like we're better. We have this idea of pride. We're seeing ourselves, our ego, is now becoming enlarged, right? Whereas when you look at these other levels, it's a diminutive ego, right? Where our ego, we feel like we're not good enough. We feel like we're not enough. But once we get up to pride, then we're starting to feel like we are. Then courage, we cross that line. Courage is where now we are feeling affirmation, right? We're empowered. We are stepping up. We're taking charge of our life. That's what courage really represents. So this calibrates at this level 200, which is, David Hawkins talks about how it's sort of that key transition between the force and power where we're going from an animalistic tendency to this higher level of consciousness, where now we are actually making forward progress. We're actually developing ourselves. We're actually becoming self-actualized at this point. Next up from there is neutrality. This is actually a great place. It's a great place to be, because when you're in this neutrality zone, what's happening is that it's not apathy. It can sometimes be interpreted as apathy, but it's like it's acceptance. It's letting whatever happens happen. I'm not going to fight this. I'm not going to try and make these things happen or make things go my way. I'm starting to get to this point of it's not full acceptance, but it's neutral. Everything's okay. It's satisfactory. We feel trust, right? We're releasing, we're letting go of the things that we had been holding on to. We're no longer trying to get our way necessarily, right? Then we have willingness. This is a step up. This is starting to get towards love. We're hopeful at this point, right? We're optimistic and we have intention. We're willing to go forward and to try something, to do something, to make changes in our life, right? Compare this to apathy. It's the opposite, right? At this point, we are willing. We're going to go forward. We're hopeful, right? We see God as inspiring. We have hope for the future, right? This is a good place to be. Then we have acceptance. This is where many people stop. And I think this is a key transition, right? You can see as the color changes here, because it is hallmarked by forgiveness. You have to go through this purge of letting go of all of these hurts. You're right to feel hurt, to be angry, to be upset. You're getting rid of this idea of justice, of things that were wrongly done to you. And this is where you're in this process of transcendence. This is where you're really rising above. And this is the thing that needs to be done in order for you to get to this level of love where you would really like to be. It's this idea that whatever is going to happen is going to happen. And I'm not only neutral about it, but I'm all for it. I truly accept it. I want it to be no other way than what it is, the way that things are unfolding. Right? You're not trying to change people. You're not trying to change events. You're accepting of them. Finally, above that, we get to reason, right? This is where we have some wisdom. This is where we're gaining understanding. This is where we're no longer being controlled by these base emotions. This is where masculinity lies. This is the area where you're truly stepping into your masculine, or starting to, is when you're no longer in the shackles of emotion, right? It doesn't mean that you don't have emotion. It just means that reason is the thing that is driving you. It's the thing that is the consciousness level that you're operating at, right? And that's where you're getting this idea, this abstraction. You're going through this process of reasoning things out, of using logic as your guide rather than what you're feeling at the time. Finally, above that, we get to love. Love is the place, right? For the most part, it's where we want to go. It's above reason, because love, now we're starting to get into the spiritual zone where not everything makes sense from a logical standpoint. It doesn't have to. Love is this reverence that we're feeling. It's this place where our state that we are staying in is the state of love. Right? In order to get into the state of love, we have to forgive. We have to be acting in love, responding in love, right? I did a whole video on this in the Bulldog Mindset membership on how to respond in love and why you should respond in love in all situations. It's about an hour-long lesson. Check it out if you haven't. If you're already a member, you can click the link down below and check it out. If not, click the link, $7 for the first month to get into the Bulldog Mindset membership. Ton of content and videos where I go in depth into these things. This video is a little bit more in depth than most of the videos on this channel, but even more in depth. 30-minute, hour-long lessons on specific things if you want to improve your life, improve yourself, right? So up from there, we have this level of joy. Now, this is where we're getting into levels where most people will never, ever make it on this planet, right? Love is hard. I think he said it was something like a couple % of people. I might be wrong on that, but it's not a lot, right? This is something that is very difficult to get to, but getting up to joy, living in the state of joy. It's this idea of, this is where you're kind of making this transition between the ego and realizing that you're part of a larger whole. This is where you're seeing God as one, as he describes it, right? It's a complete view of life. It's this serenity. You're feeling serenity, right? You're feeling that everything is good. Like you have this joy within you because you know that you're a part of a greater, that you're not just by yourself in this universe, that you're part of a greater whole of God, right? However you want to describe God. I'm not religious. I'm not trying to give you a religious, but that there is something greater, that there's this greater consciousness, that you are a part of that and belong to that. Up from there, this is where we start to get into the real sages, right? The prophets and the kind of gurus and things like that, where people who are really transcending. There's very few of these that have ever existed. Very few people that have reached this level of consciousness in all of humanity. And this is at this kind of level 600, which is this level of peace. So, joy is this feeling, but even above that is this idea of peace, right? This is where you're really at this all being. You realize that you're connected to this greater consciousness, and your life view is complete. It's this place of total bliss is what you're feeling. It's something that I can't describe because I haven't been there, right? But we have information. David Hawkins talks about this from different people who have written about people who've been there and where their state is. At this point, I think he's talking about that the physical body, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter what happens to it. Like, you're not even caring about the physical body. And then finally is this final level of what we call enlightenment, which is this 700 to 1,000 calibration. There's some breakdowns between this, finer details of this, but this is where you recognize completely. This is the complete ego death. This is completely realizing and becoming part of the one, and where you no longer are controlled by your own desires or will, where it is the God will. It is essentially, you are a conduit of channeling this conscious energy. Right now, this is something that is a place where it's almost scary, right, to think about this. Like, oh, I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to lose myself. But the dissolution of ego had to happen in order for this to occur. This is this ineffable emotion, right? Pure consciousness. It's something that is beyond what we could imagine. It is it's above even the bliss, right? In fact, David Hawkins is talking about how you have to give up. You have to give up the bliss in order to experience this, to reach this level of enlightenment, that when you have this bliss, that you're afraid of losing it, but you have to give up that fear. It's even giving up everything, essentially, to become truly one. So anyway, I thought this was super interesting. I'm really interested in this topic, and if you haven't read any of his books, definitely read them. Letting Go, Transcending Levels of Consciousness, any of his books are really, really, really quite good. He's got this thing on this whole muscle testing, which, this is where he's kind of come up with these levels from. I'm not 100% on that. I mean, I could be convinced, but even still, just looking at this chart and really kind of studying this and kind of really thinking about what these different states are. And he's got, in his book, Transcending Levels of Consciousness, he really goes into details of each one of these states, but really, really powerful stuff. I highly recommend it. So figure out where you are. Where do you think you're sitting right now? Me personally, I think that I am at the love level of consciousness. I don't say that lightly. I say that because that is where I have been focusing on and responding in love to all things. In fact, I did a whole video, like I said, in the Bulldog Mindset membership on responding in love to all things, all people. And I think that you would really enjoy that. If you haven't checked it out already, click link down below and join us in there. But I'll see you tomorrow.